While everyone waited for rescue, Qin Mian turned an armored recreational vehicle into a fortress that could cross the apocalypse. Every zombie crystal upgraded the machine, and every upgrade made its owner stronger. His final government broadcast ended with an apology, leaving every survivor completely alone. Behind Qin stood 3 chained zombies who had once been his family. His super vehicle system converted monster crystals into armor, storage, stealth, weapons, and permanent physical growth. The stronger his fortress became, the farther beyond normal humanity Qin climbed. Before leaving home, he burned the infected family members he could no longer save. Then he drove through a zombie crowd and proved the moving fortress could keep him alive. 2 months earlier, an unknown energy had swept across the planet and shattered every rule civilization trusted. The dead rose hungry, animals mutated, water spoiled, and surviving humans began awakening abnormal bodies and supernatural abilities. Qin had prepared better than most because caution had always been part of his nature. Every delay increased the chance of being surrounded, making the next decision even more important. Even before the collapse, he trained his body, practiced combat, and modified an off-road recreational vehicle for emergencies. That preparation still could not protect his mother, stepfather, and younger stepbrother from the first wave. His mother and stepfather transformed first, then attacked the boy. Before Qin could understand what was happening, he fought them with everything he had, restrained them with chains, and sealed them inside the family basement. Soon afterward, his wounded stepbrother changed too, forcing Qin to chain the last member of his household. For weeks, he fed the generator, reinforced the convenience store above, and listened for any surviving government signal. He also studied the gray crystals forming inside zombie skulls, because his vehicle reacted whenever one came close. The machine had bonded with him during the first days of chaos and opened a private interface across its windshield. According to that interface, the vehicle could consume materials, store fuel, unlock modules, and evolve beyond ordinary engineering. Qin himself was listed as a first-order evolutionary with enhanced strength, constitution, agility, and unusually high spirit. Unlike other awakened survivors, his ability did not create fire, lightning, or telekinesis. Every crystal represented another chance to keep moving, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. It created a relationship between man and machine, allowing both to grow through the same stream of apocalyptic energy. That energy came from zombie cores, which the authorities had never learned to use safely. People who swallowed them directly either died screaming or transformed into the same monsters they wanted to defeat. Qin alone could feed those crystals into the vehicle without suffering infection. The outside world had stopped following familiar rules. The government broadcast had been his last connection to organized knowledge about the changing world. When the signal announced total collapse, he understood that remaining underground would only delay an inevitable death. The zombies outside were growing faster, stronger, and more sensitive to the scent of living humans. Staying meant becoming trapped, while leaving meant gambling everything on the armored vehicle waiting behind the store. Qin entered the basement one final time and faced the 3 creatures pulling against their chains. Their faces had rotted beyond recognition, yet familiar clothing made the truth impossible to ignore. He bowed to his mother, thanked his stepfather for raising him, and silently acknowledged the brother he barely knew. No miracle was coming, and keeping them chained forever would only preserve their suffering. The infected population kept growing stronger with every passing day, making the next decision even more important. Qin poured gasoline across the floor, closed the iron door, and lit the final farewell. Roars shook the basement, while flames swallowed the last pieces of his former life. Qin's remaining shelter was becoming harder to defend, making the next decision even more important. He remained outside until every sound stopped, refusing to leave before the painful duty was finished. After the fire cooled, 3 gray crystals remained inside the ruined skulls. The mobile fortress remained his only reliable advantage. Qin covered the bodies, burned incense, and promised the dead that he would keep living. That promise became his only family inheritance when he locked the basement forever. The ruined town offered no stable place to remain, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Above ground, the convenience store was empty, battered, and stained by failed attempts from desperate outsiders. Every shelf had been stripped during the first weeks, leaving only broken glass and the smell of dried blood. Qin crossed the storage room and pulled a waterproof cover from the machine that now carried his future. The off-road recreational vehicle measured roughly 7 meters and rode on 6 massive reinforced tires. Carbon steel plates protected its body, explosion-resistant glass covered the windows, and a strengthened frame supported the interior. It was not yet invincible, but compared with any normal vehicle, it already looked built for war. Qin climbed inside and placed the 3 family crystals near the dashboard. Every delay increased the chance of being surrounded. The system absorbed them immediately, raising his available energy while displaying every stored material and vehicle component. The gain was small, but the meaning was enormous. The infected population kept growing stronger with every passing day. As long as monsters existed, Qin possessed a renewable path toward survival. The government's collapse left no dependable rescue beyond the neighborhood, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. A crash interrupted his planning when 2 evolved zombies forced their way through the damaged storefront. Qin stepped outside with his machete, split the first skull, and cut down the second before either reached him. Their crystals joined his supply, but the noise pulled an entire cluster toward the store. The rolling shutter collapsed under repeated impacts, sending metal and rotten bodies across the floor. 7 more zombies rushed through the opening with speed no corpse should possess. His family's loss removed the last reason to wait, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Qin dodged the first attacker, knocked shelves into the others, and sprinted for the driver's door. Claws struck the armor seconds after he locked himself inside. Qin's remaining shelter was becoming harder to defend. The heavy vehicle shook, yet the carbon steel shell held long enough for the engine to ignite. Qin slammed the accelerator and drove directly through the creatures crowding the front. The outside world had stopped following familiar rules, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Bodies rolled beneath the tires, while the armored nose tore through the ruined entrance. The vehicle system turned monster energy into practical survival, making the next decision even more important. Blood covered the windshield, the wipers cleared it, and the fortress entered the dead streets for the first time. More zombies rushed toward the engine noise, but they could not match the vehicle's speed. Qin left the convenience store behind without looking back, carrying only supplies, weapons, and one unbreakable promise. Moving forward was no longer ambition. It was how he honored everyone who could not leave with him. The first road out of town immediately tested whether his machine deserved to become a fortress. Dozens of zombies poured from side streets, slamming against doors and reaching for the reinforced windows. Qin accelerated through the thinner groups, but abandoned cars blocked the wider exit ahead. Every crystal represented another chance to keep moving, making the next decision even more important. Forced into a narrow alley, he realized the passage offered no room to turn around. The horde followed closely enough for their claws to scrape the rear armor. The mobile fortress remained his only reliable advantage, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. At the alley's end, a locked iron gate revealed the route was actually a dead end. Qin checked the system while the number of approaching monsters continued rising. The infected population kept growing stronger with every passing day, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Several upgrades appeared, but one function matched his immediate problem perfectly. Every crystal represented another chance to keep moving. The basic silent shield could hide every life signal inside the vehicle whenever it remained stationary. It would suppress sound, heat, scent, and the abnormal energy monsters used to locate prey. Unlocking it required nearly all his current energy and a painful amount of stored material. Qin spent everything without hesitation because resources meant nothing if he died beside them. The ruined town offered no stable place to remain, making the next decision even more important. He smashed through the iron gate, drifted into the enclosed courtyard, and shut down the engine. The newly unlocked shield spread across the vehicle like an invisible skin. Qin's remaining shelter was becoming harder to defend, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Engine heat vanished, cabin noise disappeared, and the windows darkened without blocking Qin's view. His family's loss removed the last reason to wait, making the next decision even more important. Seconds later, the pursuing horde flooded into the courtyard and searched every corner. Every delay increased the chance of being surrounded, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Several zombies passed within arm's reach of the windshield without reacting. The ruined town offered no stable place to remain. One scratched the glass in confusion, then wandered away because it could not sense the living man inside. Qin stayed perfectly still until the entire swarm lost interest and dispersed through nearby alleys. Only then did he understand what he had truly unlocked. The vehicle system turned monster energy into practical survival. When parked, the recreational vehicle was no longer shelter. It was a hidden bunker inside enemy territory, combined with armor, storage, heat, and mobility. That single function transformed his escape vehicle into a mobile fortress. Qin turned on the radio after the danger passed and searched the remaining civilian frequencies. Survivor camps promised food, convoys recruited evolutionaries, and trapped families begged strangers to risk impossible rescues. The government channel remained dead, confirming that nobody with real authority was coming. The government's collapse left no dependable rescue beyond the neighborhood, making the next decision even more important. Then the vehicle displayed a warning more terrifying than the collapse itself. The vehicle system turned monster energy into practical survival, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. The current mutation phase was nearly complete, and the next global disaster would be extreme cold. Humanity had barely survived zombies, yet the planet was preparing to freeze whatever remained. The outside world had stopped following familiar rules, making the next decision even more important. Qin looked through the dark windshield and made a decision that shaped everything afterward. The mobile fortress remained his only reliable advantage, making the next decision even more important. He would trust the machine, gather materials, hunt crystals, and become strong enough to survive every coming phase. Shelters could fall, leaders could lie, and strangers could betray him. But upgrades followed measurable rules. From that moment, zombies were not only predators surrounding his life. His family's loss removed the last reason to wait. They were energy sources waiting to be harvested. The government's collapse left no dependable rescue beyond the neighborhood. The road ahead held factories, markets, stronger mutants, and survivors who had already abandoned morality. Qin rested behind the silent shield while the dead wandered harmlessly beside his hidden walls. At sunrise, he opened the door and began hunting the resources required for his first serious expansion. 3 zombies remained inside the courtyard, and Qin intended to clear them before searching the surrounding property. He opened the door quietly, drew his compound bow, and dropped the first target with a clean headshot. A second arrow killed another, but the final zombie rushed him before he could reload. Qin met it halfway, using first-order strength to split its skull with one controlled machete strike. The victory proved his enhanced body could handle small groups without wasting fuel or damaging the fortress. He searched the 3-story house, eliminated one more infected resident, and secured every possible entrance. Food had spoiled, tap water smelled rotten, and expensive furniture had become completely worthless. Zombie dogs showed that animals were evolving through consumption, making the next decision even more important. Alcohol, cigarettes, thick clothing, tools, jewelry, and unopened packaged food still carried practical or trading value. 2 abandoned cars in the garage provided more than 50 liters of fuel. Rare metals were already becoming the main upgrade bottleneck, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. The system stored the gasoline directly, revealing that vehicle-related resources could enter a separate material space. Qin dismantled shelves, appliances, machine parts, knives, and metal fixtures until the house looked professionally stripped. The vehicle converted each object into categorized units, turning ordinary scavenging into measurable progression. Metal, polymers, organic material, fuel, and rare components steadily accumulated behind the system interface. Cash remained on the floor because paper currency could not stop hunger, cold, infection, or claws. By evening, Qin possessed enough supplies to plan beyond tomorrow. The external collector multiplied what one survivor could carry. The extreme cold warning forced him to prioritize insulation, heating, armor, and a reliable reserve of fuel. Small houses could seaport one survivor briefly, but they would never provide the industrial resources required for major upgrades. Qin needed warehouses, factories, wholesalers, and any place holding large amounts of processed material. A hardware market in the neighboring district became his first serious destination. The rescue promise made preparation more urgent than speed. It stored steel bars, alloy tubing, plates, tools, industrial plastics, and enough fuel to transform his vehicle. Qin planned 3 routes, avoiding city centers where traffic jams and zombie concentrations could trap even reinforced machines. Before departing, he checked the radio again and heard another round of strangers begging for rescue. He did not answer, because reaching unknown people without strength would only create additional corpses. The rural route toward the market remained mostly open, though isolated zombies followed the engine whenever he passed. Qin crushed the weaker ones, stopped only when safe, and collected every gray core. Each crystal increased super energy, while every impact taught him how the fortress handled violent contact. The more he drove, the clearer the system's combat value became. Rare metals were already becoming the main upgrade bottleneck. The recreational vehicle was not merely carrying him through danger, it was becoming his primary weapon. Halfway toward the market, a private radio request reached his secured channel. Zombie dogs showed that animals were evolving through consumption. The caller used Qin's birthday combination, a detail almost nobody outside his childhood would remember. The voice belonged to Hao Junjia, an old friend now trapped inside Guangqing University's materials laboratory. 35 survivors had sheltered there after students and faculty transformed across the campus. The rescue promise made preparation more urgent than speed, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Their food was nearly gone, clean water had become scarce, and official rescue had completely stopped responding. Hao asked whether Qin could contact the government, still clinging to a system that no longer existed. Qin told him the truth, rather than offering false comfort. Rural roads reduced traffic, but never removed danger. The final headquarters broadcast had ended. Satellite networks were dead, and no national rescue force was coming. Silence followed as everyone inside the laboratory realized their last institutional hope had disappeared. Some survivors immediately turned on Hao, mocking the idea that an old friend from a small town could save them. Several awakened men had already begun using physical strength as authority, creating fear inside the sealed group. Hao kept control because his own ability hardened body fat into protective armor. Zombie dogs showed that animals were evolving through consumption, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Even so, hunger and desperation were eroding the remaining rules faster than zombies could break the doors. Hao made one final offer before Qin ended the transmission. Every crystal increased the fortress's energy reserve. The laboratory stored nearly 1 ton of rare metals from a military research partnership. Osmium, rhodium, experimental alloys, and strategic materials waited behind reinforced storage doors. Every scavenged object could become armor, fuel, or future mobility. And nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Those supplies were almost impossible to obtain through ordinary scavenging. Yet Qin needed them for every advanced module. The rescue suddenly aligned with both loyalty and survival. The hardware market offered the industrial scale ordinary houses lacked. Qin promised to reach Guangqing University within 1 week, but only after strengthening the vehicle enough to enter a major city. Hao accepted immediately and told the other survivors that help was finally moving toward them. Qin knew hope could become dangerous if people mistook it for certainty. Hao's radio call gave Qin a destination beyond personal survival, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. More than 200 kilometers, multiple cities, evolved monsters, and blocked roads still separated them. Saving Hao required preparation, not heroic recklessness. Hao's radio call gave Qin a destination beyond personal survival. Qin ended the call and continued toward the hardware market with a sharper objective. First, he would gather metal, unlock better collection, and reinforce the machine. The hardware market offered the industrial scale ordinary houses lacked, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Then he would cross the dead world and pull his friend from the laboratory himself. 20 zombies wandered outside the hardware district when the recreational vehicle arrived. Second-order monsters proved the mutation hierarchy was accelerating, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Qin accelerated instead of stopping, letting 7 tons of reinforced steel strike the first line. Bodies bounced from the ram, disappeared beneath the tires, and broke against abandoned storefronts. He turned around, repeated the charge, and reduced the remaining group before stepping outside. Any zombie still moving received one final machete strike before its crystal was removed. The system rewarded the sweep with enough energy to present another function. The external collector multiplied what one survivor could carry, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Basic external collection could pull materials into storage from several meters away, while the vehicle remained stationary. Unlocking it consumed more rare metal than Qin preferred, but it multiplied every future scavenging operation. He confirmed the purchase, and the system extended an invisible collection radius around the fortress. Steel bars vanished from racks, alloy plates disappeared from stacks, and machine parts converted into organized units. Qin drove slowly from shop to shop, parking beside valuable stock and letting the vehicle consume entire sections. Hidden zombies occasionally rushed from storage rooms, only to be crushed before reaching the doors. Within hours, his material totals climbed beyond anything one person could physically carry. Every scavenged object could become armor, fuel, or future mobility, making the next decision even more important. The market gave him thousands of units of metal, composite material, polymer stock, and a growing fuel reserve. It also taught him the system valued rare elements separately from ordinary steel. Hao's radio call gave Qin a destination beyond personal survival, making the next decision even more important. Advanced upgrades would always be limited by resources that normal warehouses barely contained. The hardware market offered the industrial scale ordinary houses lacked, making the next decision even more important. Qin continued until sunset, then parked between two walls that protected both sides of the vehicle. He activated the silent shield, turned on the heater, and cooked a hot meal while darkness swallowed the market. Outside waited cold air, wandering corpses, and complete uncertainty. Second-order monsters proved the mutation hierarchy was accelerating. Inside waited warm food, reinforced walls, clean water, and a machine that recognized only its owner. For the first time since leaving home, Qin allowed himself to imagine survival lasting longer than a few days. A terrifying roar at 3 in the morning destroyed that fragile comfort. Rural roads reduced traffic, but never removed danger, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Qin reached the driver's seat and raised a night vision device toward the street. Second-order monsters proved the mutation hierarchy was accelerating, making the next decision even more important. Red eyes moved between the buildings, lower than human heads and far faster than ordinary zombies. The creatures were infected dogs with exposed muscle, split jaws, black veins, and rows of hooked teeth. One tore apart an ordinary zombie, crushed its skull, and swallowed the crystal hidden inside. The sight confirmed mutated animals could consume cores and continue evolving without any human technology. Qin recorded the discovery, but a heavy impact landed on the vehicle roof. The external collector multiplied what one survivor could carry, making the next decision even more important. One zombie dog crawled onto the hood and pressed its ruined nose against the windshield. Its senses were far sharper than those of human zombies, allowing it to detect a faint trace behind the shield. Qin kept the engine off because starting it could summon the entire pack. Rural roads reduced traffic, but never removed danger, making the next decision even more important. Less than a meter of glass separated him from a mouth capable of tearing reinforced flesh apart. The creature sniffed, listened, and scraped the hood while Qin controlled every breath. Every crystal increased the fortress's energy reserve, making the next decision even more important. Eventually, the silent shield erased the remaining signal, and the dog jumped down without attacking. Qin stayed awake until daylight because one successful escape did not mean the danger had passed. The encounter changed his priorities again. Every scavenged object could become armor, fuel, or future mobility. Armor mattered, but concealment, detection, and mobility would decide whether stronger predators ever received a chance to attack. At dawn, he finished collecting the remaining hardware stock and left the district immediately. The road seemed empty until a pickup truck burst from an intersection ahead. Rare metals were already becoming the main upgrade bottleneck, making the next decision even more important. Gunshots sounded from its cargo bed, while 2 zombie dogs chased close behind. The rescue promise made preparation more urgent than speed, making the next decision even more important. Qin prepared to change routes, but the narrow road forced both vehicles into the same lane. One dog leaped onto the pickup, absorbed a direct rifle blast, and regenerated the destroyed side of its face. The second abandoned the truck and locked onto Qin's recreational vehicle instead. Every crystal increased the fortress's energy reserve, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Sharp claws struck the roof as the creature matched the fortress despite the twisting rural road. Qin realized the machine could not hide while moving, and this predator would not stop until one of them died. Ahead, a tight corner offered his first chance to turn the vehicle's weight into a killing weapon. Qin accelerated into the turn, then snapped the steering wheel hard enough to throw the zombie dog into a field. The creature landed badly, stood almost immediately, and resumed the chase without showing visible damage. A village ahead reduced Qin's speed, allowing the predator to climb onto the roof again. This time, he slammed the brakes, launched it forward, shifted gears, and drove directly over its body. One impact was not enough for something that regenerated from rifle fire. The zombie tide gave Nana's journey an immediate personal cost, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Qin reversed, crushed it again, and repeated the maneuver until only broken bone remained. The system absorbed a second-order crystal worth 20 times an ordinary zombie core. The rain exposed how fast the climate was already changing, making the next decision even more important. That reward confirmed mutant levels followed a measurable hierarchy, and stronger enemies produced dramatically better energy. The pickup returned after escaping its own pursuer. But Qin raised his compound bow before anyone approached. A young girl climbed out, wearing a dirty hoodie, a high ponytail, and the expression of someone difficult to intimidate. She introduced herself as Nana and asked for transportation to Bishui Town. Bishui Town was collapsing faster than either expected, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Qin refused because she had redirected a monster toward him, and because strangers inside the fortress created unacceptable risk. Nana claimed the zombie dog had been her intended prey, though the destroyed pickup made that explanation hard to respect. When Qin started leaving, she offered monster crystals and information about the evolving plague. Knowledge was harder to obtain than food, so Qin finally lowered the window and demanded proof. Nana approached an ordinary zombie, stopped it with an invisible force, and tore its limbs apart without touching it. Her ability was mental manifestation, allowing imagination and spirit to create crushing pressure, restraints, and physical constructs. Qin became instantly more cautious because the cheerful teenager could kill ordinary people before they understood an attack had begun. Nana openly admitted the ability was still immature and claimed she had no hostile intention. She then opened the zombie's chest and pointed out something civilization had failed to understand. Normal corpses should have decomposed completely after 2 months, yet infected bodies stopped rotting and continued strengthening. The gray core maintained that unnatural state by circulating condensed viral energy through dead tissue. More importantly, Nana knew organizations that had learned to process that energy. Nana's mental ability was powerful, but emotionally unstable, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Qin opened the passenger door because the information could reshape every decision ahead. The silent shield made the cabin safer than any fixed shelter, making the next decision even more important. The moment Nana entered, the system activated a hidden passenger function. The passenger system gave Qin a safer way to judge strangers, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Her name, order, physical attributes, ability, condition, trust level, and carried crystal supply appeared before Qin alone. The interface showed 2 second-order cores and 13 first-order cores inside her small bag. It even offered to absorb them, but Qin refused to steal from someone who had not attacked him. That choice established a boundary the apocalypse had not yet erased. Evolution potions had turned monster cores into political currency, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Nana inspected the interior while Qin asked where survivors traded crystals and weapons. Trust between Qin and Nana grew through practical choices, making the next decision even more important. She explained that the Apocalypse Knights controlled Bishui Town after raiding police stations for firearms. Their members were evolutionaries and ability users who traded guns, ammunition, and supplies for monster cores. Qin asked why any faction valued crystals when direct consumption caused infection. Family loyalty pushed both survivors toward greater risk, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Nana revealed a research organization called Apocalypse Declaration had created injectable evolution potions. The zombie tide gave Nana's journey an immediate personal cost, making the next decision even more important. Processed first-order crystals could awaken ordinary people with roughly a 60% success rate. Second-order potions could push existing evolutionaries toward their next breakthrough. Trust between Qin and Nana grew through practical choices. Failure still meant death or mutation, But survivors desperate for strength accepted the risk. Apocalypse Declaration exchanged potions, exoskeleton equipment, weapons, and specialized technology for a constant supply of cores. Qin silently recalculated his position in the world. Nana's information revealed how quickly survivor factions were adapting. His vehicle system remained extraordinary, yet other humans were learning, organizing, and evolving faster than he expected. Isolation had protected him, but it had also hidden how quickly new powers were becoming political currency. Nana guided him along roads with fewer blockages, while observing his unusual habit of crushing zombies without collecting bodies. She sensed the missing cores and understood he possessed another secret, but wisely kept the question to herself. Heavy rain forced them to stop before reaching Bishui town. The zombie tide gave Nana's journey an immediate personal cost. The temperature felt impossibly cold for late summer, confirming Qin's extreme weather warning was already affecting the region. He parked behind roadside trees, activated the silent shield, and began organizing every piece of information Nana provided. Then he demanded 5 first-order crystals for travel and overnight shelter. The rain exposed how fast the climate was already changing, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Nana accused him of robbery, especially after discovering the price included sleeping inside the vehicle during a freezing storm. Qin opened the door and offered the rain as a free alternative. Nana's information revealed how quickly survivor factions were adapting, making the next decision even more important. She paid immediately, calling him the most heartless businessman left in civilization. The passenger system gave Qin a safer way to judge strangers, making the next decision even more important. The system converted her payment into energy, while Qin kept the deeper upgrade interface hidden. Nana cleaned herself in the compact bathroom, explored the sleeping area, and criticized the vehicle's weak interior comfort. Qin ignored the commentary, turned on the heater when she began shivering, and prepared 2 bowls of hot noodles. Nana claimed she was not hungry until her stomach loudly corrected the lie. Bishui town was collapsing faster than either expected, making the next decision even more important. The first hot meal she had eaten in over a month softened her suspicion faster than any explanation. She warned that light, heat, and food smells would attract zombie dogs moving through the storm. Qin calmly explained the silent shield, though Nana did not believe him until growls approached through the rain. More than a dozen infected dogs ran past the illuminated vehicle without slowing. Nana's mental ability was powerful, but emotionally unstable, making the next decision even more important. One sniffed the tires, searched for several seconds, and left because every human signal had vanished. Nana finally understood that her 5 crystals had purchased a night inside the safest shelter she had ever seen. The vehicle's warmth, hidden life signature, clean bedding, and locked ownership system gave her something the apocalypse had stolen. For the first time in weeks, she slept deeply without expecting claws through the door. Qin saw her trust status shift from cautious to friendly. Bishui town was collapsing faster than either expected. He did not mistake that change for loyalty, but it proved actions mattered more than speeches. Morning arrived with flooded roads, cold air, and the smell of breakfast filling the cabin. Nana woke defensively, then remembered where she was and immediately reached for the food. Steamed buns, fried meat, and preserved fruit looked like luxury beside the starving world outside. After eating, they continued toward Bishui town through water deep enough to swallow smaller cars. The upgraded recreational vehicle crossed it easily, but both travelers noticed the nearby villages were unnaturally empty. Thousands of zombies had vanished, leaving crushed plants and a broad migration trail across the fields. Zombie dog tracks followed the same direction instead of scattering in search of individual prey. Nana recognized the pattern as the beginning of a zombie tide. The silent shield made the cabin safer than any fixed shelter, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Large groups were moving with shared purpose toward Bishui town. Nana's mental ability was powerful, but emotionally unstable. Her playful attitude disappeared because her grandmother lived inside an old factory shelter there. Qin warned that entering a forming tide without information could kill both of them. Nana threw her entire crystal bag toward him and begged only for transport near the factory. The request was no longer about comfort or convenience. Evolution potions had turned monster cores into political currency. She was trying to reach the one person who had raised her when her parents abandoned responsibility. Qin accelerated, because he understood what it meant to lose family without receiving one final chance. Gunfire became audible long before the town center appeared. The rain exposed how fast the climate was already changing. More than 2,000 zombies poured through the streets, while infected dogs targeted survivors trapped on rooftops. The Apocalypse Knights fired from defensive positions, but their formation was already collapsing. Family loyalty pushed both survivors toward greater risk, making the next decision even more important. Nana directed Qin toward Third Road, where the Red Star factory stood behind a destroyed metal gate. The closer they moved, the more corpses crowded the street. Family loyalty pushed both survivors toward greater risk. Qin drove through them, using armor and momentum to create a temporary path toward the shelter. The factory entrance had been broken open, proving the horde reached it before they did. Nana jumped from the vehicle before it fully stopped and used mental force to scatter the first attackers. Qin watched her race inside while more zombies flooded through the ruined gate. Her panic revealed that every joke, bargain, and secret had been covering one desperate attachment. A scream for her grandmother echoed from deep inside the factory. Trust between Qin and Nana grew through practical choices, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Then a wave of pressure rolled across the courtyard, hard enough for Qin to feel it inside the armored cabin. Nana emerged with silver light filling her eyes, and grief erasing every trace of her usual expression. She had found the person she came to protect, but she had arrived too late. Rage broke whatever limit had restrained her ability. The passenger system gave Qin a safer way to judge strangers. Every zombie within 20 meters froze beneath an invisible force. Nana's information revealed how quickly survivor factions were adapting, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Their bodies compressed, burst, and collapsed before they could take another step. Evolution potions had turned monster cores into political currency, making the next decision even more important. Qin backed the fortress away because the uncontrolled pressure threatened anything standing near her. More infected dogs rushed toward the disturbance, only to be crushed the moment they crossed her range. Nana was no longer fighting like a frightened survivor. The silent shield made the cabin safer than any fixed shelter. She was becoming a disaster, powerful enough to erase the horde that had taken her last family member. The rampage continued for nearly 10 minutes, clearing the factory faster than an armed survivor squad could have managed. Each attack drained Nana's spirit, yet grief pushed her to release another crushing wave. When the final infected dog collapsed, the silver light vanished and her body fell beside the ruined shelter. Qin drove back immediately, lifted her from the blood-covered ground, and secured her inside the vehicle. A zombie dog struck the door seconds before the silent shield erased every life signal. The remaining monsters circled in confusion, while Qin checked the passenger interface. Shared growth made every vehicle improvement more valuable, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Nana's spirit reading had disappeared. Her status showed mental collapse, and the system identified an advancing second evolution. She required purified super energy supplementation before the unstable breakthrough destroyed her mind. Trust had become harder to find than strategic metal, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Raw crystals could not help, because direct exposure would infect her. Saving Nana forced Qin to spend resources he could eventually replace, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Only an evolution potion offered any chance of surviving the process. The Research Institute proved organized powers were already emerging, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Nana had already told him where such medicine could be found. Team binding changed the fortress from a solo ability into a shared system, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Qin left Bishui Town and drove toward the Apocalypse Declaration trading manor outside Neon City. The route should have taken only a few hours before civilization ended. The coming freeze kept shaping every technical decision, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Wrecked vehicles, collapsed roads, and wandering monsters transformed it into a dangerous race against Nana's failing condition. Qin avoided city centers, crushed isolated zombies for energy, and checked her breathing at every stop. By late afternoon, reinforced walls and automatic weapons appeared beyond the ruins. Their partnership multiplied both collection speed and battlefield control, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Apocalypse Declaration operated from a large manor protected by heavy gates, drones, exoskeleton guards, and disciplined patrols. Survivors entered carrying crystals and left with potions, weapons, or recruitment contracts. The fortress was beginning to feel like a moving home, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Yellow powder scattered by drones kept nearby zombies away, proving the organization possessed technology beyond ordinary factions. Qin parked outside because private vehicles were forbidden inside the compound. Nana's second evolution greatly expanded their combined combat potential, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. His armored recreational vehicle drew greedy attention immediately, but the local guards prevented anyone from acting openly, carrying cigarettes, weapons, and an ordinary backpack. Qin entered the active marketplace alone. Their partnership multiplied both collection speed and battlefield control, making the next decision even more important. A subordinate force called the Blood Legion recruited survivors by promising one free evolution potion. Their members wore powered exoskeletons and claimed they had hunted a third-order creature inside the city. Qin understood the Institute was not simply a laboratory. Shared growth made every vehicle improvement more valuable. It was becoming a government, military contractor, market, and gatekeeper for human evolution. The fortress was beginning to feel like a moving home, making the next decision even more important. At the potion window, a researcher demanded 5 second-order crystals for 1 second-order dose. Qin refused to spend that many high-value cores and asked whether other goods could cover the price. Cigarettes counted for part of the cost, while his silent compound bow covered the remainder. Losing the weapon hurt, but Nana's life mattered more than equipment he could eventually replace. Qin completed the trade, concealed the purple injection, and returned to the vehicle before darkness. Several modified vans followed after he departed, confirming people had marked his fortress as valuable prey. He accelerated, changed routes, and used the silent shield inside thick roadside vegetation. The pursuers searched nearby, found no trace, and finally abandoned the attempt. Saving Nana forced Qin to spend resources he could eventually replace, making the next decision even more important. Only after the road became quiet did Qin return to Nana's bedside. The Research Institute proved organized powers were already emerging, making the next decision even more important. Her body convulsed, her face had lost color, and her pulse showed the breakthrough was reaching its final danger. Qin injected the potion, then chained her carefully in case failure transformed her into a monster. Her entire body tightened before becoming frighteningly still. Nana's second evolution greatly expanded their combined combat potential. She continued breathing, so Qin covered her with a blanket and waited through the night. At dawn, the passenger panel showed the advancement nearing completion without any sign of infection. Qin removed the restraints and allowed himself the first real breath of relief since the factory. Saving Nana cost rare currency, a valuable weapon, fuel, time, and unwanted attention. Yet abandoning her would have turned his fortress into nothing more than a better cage for one lonely man. While Nana recovered, Qin reached a massive construction material market and began harvesting steel by the warehouse. The fortress smashed through shutters, crushed helmeted zombies, and absorbed cores without requiring him to leave the driver's seat. Bundled reinforcement bars vanished into storage by the thousand as the external collection system worked continuously. Qin cleared warehouse after warehouse, gaining the industrial stock needed for armor, suspension, heating, and advanced concealment. When hunger finally forced him to stop, he found Nana awake, but staring into silence. Her grandmother's death had survived the potion, even though her body did. Team binding changed the fortress from a solo ability into a shared system, making the next decision even more important. Qin prepared food without offering empty comfort and sat nearby until she chose whether to keep living. Nana drank wine too quickly, coughed through the burn, and admitted her grandmother had been her only real parent. Her biological parents created separate lives and left the girl with the one woman who never abandoned her. The factory had taken that final anchor, leaving power without purpose. The construction market supplied the bulk materials future upgrades required, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Qin told her grief was allowed, but surrender would betray the person who had protected her. Her grandmother wanted her alive, not frozen forever beside one terrible memory. Nana's second evolution greatly expanded their combined combat potential, making the next decision even more important. Nana cried, ate, and finally promised she would survive well enough to honor that sacrifice. Then she asked Qin whether she could remain with him. The coming freeze kept shaping every technical decision. The passenger interface immediately raised her trust status to trusted and unlocked permanent team binding. Qin accepted because her request was no longer a bargain between strangers. The construction market supplied the bulk materials future upgrades required, making the next decision even more important. It was a choice to build something after both of them had lost everyone waiting at home. The system bound Nana as the fortress's first team member. Their partnership multiplied both collection speed and battlefield control. Energy surged through her recovering body, synchronizing her growth with every future vehicle upgrade. Her attributes jumped immediately, confirming bound members shared part of the machine's progression. Nana completed her second-order awakening with dramatically higher spirit and refined mental manifestation. Qin finally revealed the rule behind his ability. The construction market supplied the bulk materials future upgrades required. Every crystal and material strengthened the vehicle, while every major vehicle upgrade permanently strengthened its owner and trusted team. Nana stared at the holographic interface like someone discovering a hidden law of reality. The recreational vehicle could continue evolving into heavier armor, advanced weapons, expanded living space, and perhaps entirely new forms. In theory, nothing in the system described a final limit. The fortress was beginning to feel like a moving home. The machine everyone else would call transportation was actually an endlessly developing survival platform. Nana laughed through the remains of her grief and named their partnership the Apocalypse Luxury Vehicle Team. Qin confiscated the wine because she was still underage, immediately restoring their usual argument. Then Nana emptied her crystal bag into the system without asking for payment. More than 80 energy points entered the fortress, proving her trust had become practical commitment. She used mental manifestation to lift heavy metal ingots from distant warehouse corners. Qin cleared monsters while Nana floated entire loads into the collection radius. Shared growth made every vehicle improvement more valuable, making the next decision even more important. What had taken him hours alone now disappeared in a fraction of the time. Together, they turned the construction market into the first supply depot for a fortress designed to outlive the world. Nana's power also changed combat efficiency. Saving Nana forced Qin to spend resources he could eventually replace. Invisible hammers crushed zombie skulls from a distance, while Qin protected her from unexpected angles. Their roles developed naturally. He drove, planned, fought up close, and controlled every system decision. She moved obstacles, shaped the battlefield, gathered cores, and created force where steel alone could not reach. By nightfall, the construction market had been almost completely stripped of useful materials. Nana collapsed at the table from mental exhaustion, then recovered immediately when dinner appeared. Qin watched her eat and noticed the vehicle no longer felt silent in the same painful way. A teammate created noise, inconvenience, responsibility, and something unexpectedly close to home. Trust had become harder to find than strategic metal, making the next decision even more important. After dinner, both studied the available upgrades. The Research Institute proved organized powers were already emerging. They prioritized intermediate silent shielding, so the fortress could conceal itself while moving at low speed. The improvement consumed thousands of material units and another major supply of rare metals. Once complete, engine noise, heat, scent, and life energy remained suppressed during cautious movement. That function would let them enter cities without summoning every infected creature nearby. Their second choice was all-terrain explosion-resistant tires. Team binding changed the fortress from a solo ability into a shared system. Roads had become rubble, mud, wreckage, and wilderness, making conventional travel increasingly impossible. The upgraded tires improved traction, durability, and the vehicle's ability to leave blocked routes entirely. Both upgrades fed energy back into Qin and Nana. Trust had become harder to find than strategic metal. Qin reached second-order strength without injecting a potion or gambling against mutation. The coming freeze kept shaping every technical decision, making the next decision even more important. His constitution, agility, and spirit climbed alongside the fortress, proving his safest growth method was also his most scalable. Nana's attributes rose again, turning her recent breakthrough into an even stronger foundation. The pair slept behind upgraded concealment, while colder wind moved through the ruined market. Their next road led toward Guangqing University, where hunger was turning trapped survivors into something worse than zombies. Before entering a city of millions, Qin and Nana scavenged electronics for chips, rare elements, and practical entertainment. Intermediate concealment let them roll through a shopping district while nearby zombies wandered without noticing the quiet engine. A 4-meter charger fed in the street, but Qin avoided unnecessary combat and focused on the objective. Nana entered the mall for music players and games, while Qin harvested semiconductors, gold, gallium, indium, and specialized components. Electronic stock produced less bulk material than construction warehouses, yet every rare element mattered for advanced modules. Nana returned carrying entertainment equipment, with a zombie horde and several chargers following close behind. They escaped before the swarm sealed the district, adding laughter to a route that still required constant vigilance. An expressway gas station became their next target because the fortress needed fuel for heat, movement, and active systems. Wrecked trucks blocked the entrance, so Nana used mental force to pull the tangled vehicles aside. The task drained her quickly, reminding both teammates that even powerful abilities required careful energy management. Inside the station, dozens of zombies and 2 second-order lickers defended the fuel. Military wreckage proved trained soldiers had failed in the same district, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Qin entered alone to test how far his new physical growth had carried him. Ordinary zombies fell beneath one machete swing, unable to match his improved speed or strength. The lickers attacked with barbed tongues, flexible bodies, and recovery far beyond normal infected creatures. Qin cut the first tongue, severed a leg, and split the monster's head before the second ambushed from behind. Leaking gasoline made blades and sparks dangerous, forcing him to fight the remaining creature with his bare hands. He climbed onto its back and hammered the skull repeatedly until reinforced bone collapsed. The fight produced 2 second-order crystals and nearly 30 first-order cores. The road to Guangqing demanded fuel, patience, and constant route changes, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. More importantly, it proved Qin's body was becoming a weapon, even when the vehicle could not attack directly. Nana drove over afterward, laughing at the blood covering him while he filled the fortress from underground tanks. They scavenged packaged food, bottled water, cigarettes, medicine, and daily necessities from the station store. That night, they cooked hot pot outside and briefly remembered what normal life had felt like. The moment mattered because survival without any comfort would eventually turn people into machines or monsters. Qin still checked the apocalypse warning before sleeping. The gas station fight proved Qin could battle without the fortress. The temperature approached freezing despite the season, and the extreme cold phase continued advancing. The road to Guangqing demanded fuel, patience, and constant route changes, making the next decision even more important. Morning revealed the highway completely blocked by abandoned vehicles. The zombie python exposed the limits of concealment against stronger senses. Their upgraded tires carried the fortress through muddy fields until another rural road appeared. The route toward Guangqing University crossed increasingly dangerous territory. Every kilometer consumed time the extreme cold had already limited. Cities held zombie concentrations, but wilderness hid mutated animals that evolved without human observation. Gray fog covered sections near Guangqing, created by dense negative energy from enormous zombie populations. Nana sensed at least one fourth-order presence inside the fog, making the direct road unacceptable. The university stood near the outer edge, forcing them to choose between the contaminated zone and a mountain detour. Without enough rare metal for advanced suspension, Qin chose an old village trail, barely visible on the map. The recreational vehicle entered the mountains, where concrete gradually became dirt and dirt became broken stone. Progress slowed to a crawl as steep slopes and narrow turns punished the heavy frame. Nana complained until barbecue appeared, then declared the mountain camp an acceptable luxury stop. They ate quickly and activated concealment before darkness awakened the wildlife. Mutated animals made the wilderness as dangerous as the cities, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Infected animals hunted one another beyond the windows, consuming flesh and cores to accelerate their mutations. A violent impact shook the roof after midnight. Gray fog warned that higher-order creatures controlled the urban center through night vision. Nana saw a zombie python longer than 15 meters circling the fortress. Rotten scales covered its body, bone blades protruded from its ribs, and crimson eyes tracked movement behind the glass. The creature wrapped around the vehicle with enough strength to make the reinforced frame groan. Corrosive mucus dripped onto the windshield and scarred material rated to resist bullets. Mutated animals made the wilderness as dangerous as the cities, making the next decision even more important. Silent shielding erased their signals. Yet, the python sensed enough residual life to continue searching. Nana, fearless against human zombies, gripped Qin's sleeve because snakes triggered an instinctive terror she could not control. Qin kept both of them silent and refused to start the engine while the creature surrounded the vehicle. A moving fortress was powerful, but against a possible fourth-order predator, panic could transform armor into a coffin. The python pressed its ruined head against the windshield and tasted the air with a barbed black tongue. Minutes stretched painfully until the last trace of their presence disappeared. The gas station fight proved Qin could battle without the fortress, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Unable to locate prey, the monster unwound its body and vanished into the mutated forest. Neither teammate slept properly afterward. The road to Guangqing demanded fuel, patience, and constant route changes. The encounter proved the wilderness was not safer than the city, only dangerous in different ways. They left before daylight fully awakened the surrounding predators. The university approach confirmed the rescue would require stealth. A ravine soon blocked the narrow trail, threatening to end the detour completely. The gas station fight proved Qin could battle without the fortress, making the next decision even more important. Nana shaped earth and stone with mental manifestation, constructing a temporary bridge across the gap. Qin drove the nearly 9-ton fortress over it, while she reinforced every section beneath the tires. Her ability became a private road-building crew for the remaining mountain route. Nana's terrain control made impossible roads temporarily passable, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. She formed ramps, widened turns, filled holes, and stabilized collapsing ground as they advanced. By noon, the mountains opened, and Guangqing University finally appeared beyond the trees. Gray fog warned that higher-order creatures controlled the urban center, making the next decision even more important. A dense zombie horde surrounded the outer campus, confirming the rescue would require concealment rather than brute speed. Nana rested after exhausting her spirit, while Qin studied the university's enormous pre-apocalypse layout. The campus contained dormitories, libraries, research buildings, residences, sports facilities, and thousands of possible infected students. Qin tried House Channel repeatedly, but no answer returned. Military wreckage proved trained soldiers had failed in the same district. The silence could mean damaged equipment, an occupied frequency, or the death of everyone he promised to reach. He rejected the worst conclusion until evidence forced him to accept it. The zombie python exposed the limits of concealment against stronger senses, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. After Nana recovered, the fortress entered through the eastern gate under intermediate silent shielding. Zombies in student uniforms wandered beside the road without noticing the low-speed vehicle. The mountain detour traded zombie density for unknown predators, making the next decision even more important. A campus map from the publicity office revealed the materials research district on the opposite side. Nana pulled the map through a broken window, using invisible force, avoiding unnecessary exposure. They followed side roads and moved slowly enough for concealment to remain stable. Nana's terrain control made impossible roads temporarily passable, making the next decision even more important. Survivors watched from a faculty apartment window and waved desperately when the vehicle passed. Qin did not stop because the fortress lacked room, information, and supplies for every trapped stranger. Saving people without a plan could destroy the team, already risking everything for one confirmed objective. Near the library, several desperate students escaped and ran directly toward the vehicle. The zombie python exposed the limits of concealment against stronger senses, making the next decision even more important. Zombies caught one girl, tore her down, and began feeding while the others reached the fortress. They pounded on the windows, blocked the road, and demanded entry without considering the horde following them. Qin continued moving slowly, giving them every chance to step aside. Gray fog warned that higher-order creatures controlled the urban center, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. One survivor threw a rock, another climbed onto the hood, and both tried to force compliance. Their noise brought more zombies from every direction. The mountain detour traded zombie density for unknown predators. Qin stopped the vehicle and let the silent shield protect everyone already inside. Every kilometer consumed time the extreme cold had already limited, making the next decision even more important. The attackers mistook the pause for surrender until locked doors refused to open. The university approach confirmed the rescue would require stealth, making the next decision even more important. Explosion-resistant glass ignored their rocks, while the approaching horde ignored the concealed fortress. Military wreckage proved trained soldiers had failed in the same district, making the next decision even more important. The students screamed, cursed, and blamed Qin for consequences created by their own violence. Moments later, zombies pulled them from the armor and ended the confrontation. Every kilometer consumed time the extreme cold had already limited, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Qin and Nana watched without satisfaction, because the apocalypse punished stupidity more quickly than any human court. Once the area settled, Nana crushed the remaining zombies and collected their cores. They continued toward the research district, where evidence of a military disaster covered the road. Transport trucks, armored vehicles, shell casings, broken weapons, and scattered bones marked a failed rescue attempt. Something had ripped open an armored personnel carrier as easily as thin sheet metal. The fortress absorbed titanium, tungsten, composites, and rare alloys from the destroyed military equipment. Qin gained valuable material, but the battlefield warned that trained soldiers with heavy weapons had already lost here. 200 meters farther, the materials laboratory appeared behind a plaza stained black with dried blood. The entrance had been smashed open, and human skulls were stacked deliberately beside the doorway. Ordinary zombies did not create trophies. Mutated animals made the wilderness as dangerous as the cities. A powerful negative field filled the building, pressing against Qin and Nana before they even approached. Rare metals waited somewhere inside, but so did a creature intelligent enough to arrange its victims. Nana offered to lure it out using her own living scent. The mountain detour traded zombie density for unknown predators, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Qin refused because teammates were not disposable equipment. Nana's terrain control made impossible roads temporarily passable. Instead, he turned the fortress around and returned toward the faculty apartment. The university approach confirmed the rescue would require stealth, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. If the hidden monster required bait, Qin intended to find a method that did not sacrifice anyone he had promised to protect. The faculty apartment still held more than a dozen teachers and students who had survived by hiding behind furniture. Qin climbed the exterior wall, smashed through a third-floor window, and entered before anyone understood what was happening. Their panic changed into excitement when they recognized the driver who had passed earlier. A middle-aged administrator immediately introduced himself as Director Liu and began speaking as though old authority still commanded obedience. He thanked Qin on behalf of the university, promised future recognition, and expected transportation without offering useful information. Qin drew his blood-stained machete, and every ceremonial speech stopped. Every observation reduced one unknown inside the coming battle. He asked why nearly 100 soldiers had entered the research district and never returned. Director Liu avoided the question, insisting rescue should happen before explanations. Hao's weak signal confirmed the rescue target was still alive, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Qin slapped away the performance and made the hierarchy of the new world completely clear. Status without courage, knowledge, resources, or strength could no longer force anyone to obey. He selected Liu because the man knew campus leadership decisions and had contributed nothing to protecting the group. Qin carried him through the window and landed safely below, revealing physical power far beyond an ordinary survivor. Nana welcomed the terrified administrator into the vehicle with enough enthusiasm to make him even more suspicious. Under direct questioning, Liu finally described the military rescue operation. The extreme cold deadline made prolonged waiting unacceptable. University leadership had contacted a regional unit roughly 1 month after the outbreak. Rare metals made the building impossible for Qin to abandon, making the next decision even more important. 10 vehicles, surveillance drones, and nearly 100 armed soldiers entered through the research district. Gunfire continued for hours before the rescue force collapsed against monsters hidden around the laboratories. A flying creature destroyed at least one drone, while something on the ground tore armored vehicles open. Liu had remained hidden and could provide no useful description beyond screams, explosions, and total failure. The account confirmed the laboratory area contained more than one dangerous evolved species. Nana's remaining spirit had to be preserved for the decisive moment, making the next decision even more important. Qin returned to the research plaza with Director Liu restrained by Nana's invisible force. 3 grenades recovered from the military wreckage were attached to the administrator's clothing. Every observation reduced one unknown inside the coming battle, making the next decision even more important. Qin claimed they would protect him if possible, though Liu finally understood the rescue had never been about him. Nana moved the unwilling bait toward the dark entrance while remaining safely inside the armored fortress. Liu shouted his title at the building, as though a mutated predator might respect university administration. The negative energy inside changed immediately. The materials laboratory contained both strategic resources and hidden predators. Heavy breathing rolled through the doorway, followed by slow steps strong enough to vibrate broken glass. 4 crimson lights appeared first, rotating independently inside the darkness. Human betrayal complicated a mission already dominated by monsters. A massive claw gripped the metal frame and bent it beneath black blade-shaped fingers. The creature that emerged stood over 5 meters tall and had no normal skin left. Dark muscle covered its body, its arms nearly touched the ground, and 4 eyes locked onto Liu from different angles. Nana identified the mutant as a fear-class creature approaching 4th Order. Jianen's group had become more dangerous than ordinary starving survivors, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Its negative field attacked the mind directly, producing paralysis before the physical strike ever arrived. Director Liu stopped struggling because his body no longer obeyed conscious thought. Human betrayal complicated a mission already dominated by monsters, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Qin ordered Nana to pull the bait sideways and draw the creature farther into the open. The monster crossed the distance too quickly for normal eyes to follow. The materials laboratory contained both strategic resources and hidden predators, making the next decision even more important. One moment it stood near the entrance. The next, its claw had pierced Liu from chest to skull. The grenades detonated while the creature held him above the ground. The Guardian's fear field attacked the mind before the body, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Fire and debris swallowed the entrance, injuring the mutant and destroying the surrounding wall. Qin did not attack immediately because the explosion revealed more than damage. Hao's weak signal confirmed the rescue target was still alive, making the next decision even more important. The creature's wounds began closing, while additional zombie movement increased throughout the research district. A direct fight would create noise capable of pulling the entire campus toward them. Qin reversed the fortress beyond the plaza and reactivated concealment before the fear-class mutant located the vehicle. Enraged, the creature searched around the ruined entrance, but could not follow the missing life signal. The test had succeeded at a terrible cost. Jianen's group had become more dangerous than ordinary starving survivors. They now knew its size, speed, regeneration, mental pressure, and probable order. Jianen's group had become more dangerous than ordinary starving survivors, making the next decision even more important. They also knew ordinary explosives could injure it without delivering a decisive kill. The extreme cold deadline made prolonged waiting unacceptable, making the next decision even more important. Nana wanted to attack before the wounds healed, but Qin refused to fight without understanding the building and survivors inside. Their objective was rare metal and Hao Junjia, not an unnecessary duel against a near 4th Order predator. Qin moved the hidden fortress behind a collapsed service building and opened the radio again. Static filled the secured channel until one weak burst repeated from somewhere inside the laboratory. The signal did not contain words, but its timing matched Hao's previous emergency pattern. His friend's radio was still operating. Hao's weak signal confirmed the rescue target was still alive. That meant someone inside the laboratory had survived the monster, the hunger, and the internal collapse. Beneath the 3rd floor, the remaining group had sealed themselves inside a reinforced material storage room. Their original 35 survivors had fallen through infection, starvation, attacks, and increasingly violent disputes. Food disappeared 5 days earlier, and clean water had reached its final containers. Human betrayal complicated a mission already dominated by monsters, making the next decision even more important. Hao's hardening ability protected him during zombie encounters, but could not feed everyone behind the locked door. A short-haired graduate researcher named Wei Yin helped organize supplies and maintain the laboratory records. Zhao Yuan, another young survivor, supported her despite exhaustion and fear. Military losses revealed how badly earlier teams had underestimated the threat, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Outside their storage room, Hao Jianan led several evolutionaries who had abandoned every remaining moral limit. They refused to risk leaving for food, then began killing weaker survivors and consuming human flesh. Hao Junjie confronted them, but numbers overwhelmed his defensive ability. The materials laboratory contained both strategic resources and hidden predators, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Jianan joked that removing one of Hao's legs would provide enough meat for several days. The group attacked like starving animals, proving human speech did not prevent monstrous behavior. Wei Yin created a distraction with a fire extinguisher and pulled Hao into the reinforced room. Jianan's people beat against the metal door and promised the shelter would not protect them forever. Every survivor inside understood hunger had created enemies on both sides. Rare metals made the building impossible for Qin to abandon, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Zombies waited outside the building, while cannibals controlled the corridors beyond their door. Hao kept sending weak radio bursts because Qin's promise was the only plan left. He did not know the armored fortress was already hidden less than a kilometer away. Qin studied the signal strength and determined the transmitter came from the laboratory's upper floors. Nana wanted to force an entrance immediately, but her spirit had not fully recovered from moving through the mountains. The Fear-class mutant still guarded the main route and responded instantly to exposed life energy. Qin chose to spend the remaining daylight gathering information and clearing alternative access points. They circled the research district under concealment, scanning damaged buildings, service tunnels, and external stairwells. Military wreckage revealed firing positions facing the laboratory rather than the surrounding campus. That detail suggested the soldiers had not simply encountered random zombies. Nana's remaining spirit had to be preserved for the decisive moment, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Their primary battle had centered on whatever emerged from the materials building. The Guardian's fear field attacked the mind before the body, making the next decision even more important. Nana found deep claw marks on multiple armored doors and blood trails leading into the lower lobby. Qin discovered abandoned ammunition, drone fragments, and a sealed case containing experimental detection equipment. The fortress absorbed the electronic components, increasing its reserve of rare technical material. A damaged military map marked the laboratory, material storage, and an underground connection to another research wing. Qin memorized the route and identified a narrow loading entrance behind the building. The opening could admit the fortress only after debris was removed. Every observation reduced one unknown inside the coming battle, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Nana used controlled mental force to shift broken concrete without alerting the Fear-class creature. Every movement had to remain below the threshold that disturbed the negative field. As darkness approached, they created a concealed path toward the service entrance. Military losses revealed how badly earlier teams had underestimated the threat, making the next decision even more important. Qin parked again, activated the stationary shield, and prepared food while maintaining radio contact. A faint voice finally broke through the static. The Guardian's fear field attacked the mind before the body. Hao whispered Qin's name once before the signal disappeared. Military losses revealed how badly earlier teams had underestimated the threat. The childhood friend everyone expected to die was still alive inside the monster's territory. Qin's objective changed from uncertain recovery to confirmed rescue. Rare metals made the building impossible for Qin to abandon. Then Hao's next transmission revealed the real twist inside the laboratory. The extreme cold deadline made prolonged waiting unacceptable, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. The rare metal storage remained intact, but the survivors were divided into two hostile groups. One group protected the materials and waited for Qin. Nana's remaining spirit had to be preserved for the decisive moment. The other had become cannibals and intended to seize any rescue vehicle that entered. Jianan's evolutionaries were watching the lobby, planning to attack whoever killed or distracted the guarding monster. Hao warned that helping the wrong people could place armed traitors inside Qin's fortress. Qin ended the call, knowing the rescue required defeating a boss outside and identifying monsters still wearing human faces inside. Qin told Hao to conserve power, avoid open fighting, and keep Wei Yin near the material storage controls. He also warned them not to open the door for anyone claiming the monster had been defeated. Jiannen's group would likely imitate rescuers the moment an opportunity appeared. Qin treated the Guardian's fear as an ability instead of truth, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Hao acknowledged the plan and returned to silence before the weak radio drained its remaining battery. Nana studied Qin's expression and recognized the decision had become personal. The hidden fortress entered without any military support, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. He had crossed ruined cities to honor one promise, and he would not let human predators erase it at the finish line. Still, Qin refused to charge blindly into a building controlled by an intelligent mutant. The fortress needed a clear line for acceleration, enough room to reverse, and protection against attacks from both sides. Nana's mental power could restrain the creature briefly, but the fear field might weaken her concentration. Qin's enhanced body could damage it only after armor and momentum broke the exterior defenses. Their winning method required the machine, the ability user, and the driver operating as one combat system. They spent the night studying every angle through binoculars and the remaining military map. The Fear-class creature stayed near the entrance, occasionally dragging corpses into the darkness. Ordinary zombies avoided its immediate territory until hunger or noise pulled them closer. The mutant seemed capable of controlling the plaza through presence alone. Every corridor could conceal infected bodies or human betrayal, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Qin marked its patrol timing, response speed, preferred attack direction, and the distance it moved from the building. Nana measured how long she could maintain a full restraint before mental exhaustion blurred her vision. Neither pretended the plan was safe. The rescue plan depended on timing rather than overwhelming strength. The difference was that calculated danger could be repeated, adjusted, and turned into victory. Random heroism only created one dramatic corpse. Every teammate received a role that matched their strongest ability. Before dawn, Qin checked the apocalypse progress display again. The rescue plan depended on timing rather than overwhelming strength, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Viral mutation had reached 97%, while the extreme cold phase waited only days away. The coming freeze placed a deadline on every delay. Every teammate received a role that matched their strongest ability, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Without the laboratory's rare metals, the fortress could not unlock the insulation, heating, or defensive improvements they needed. Rescue and survival had become the same mission. House survivors had to move before fear created another delay. Morning revealed frost along shattered windows despite the season. The service entrance offered the only controlled path into the building, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Qin cooked a heavy breakfast because both teammates would burn enormous energy during the operation. Nana ate in unusual silence, then checked every strap and tied her hair away from her eyes. The playful teenager understood one mistake could cost Hao's group, Qin or herself. They began by clearing isolated zombies around the rear loading path. One broken sequence could trap everyone inside the laboratory, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Nana crushed skulls without explosions, while Qin finished hidden targets with a recovered military knife. The fortress absorbed the cores and remained concealed whenever movement stopped. The rescue plan depended on timing rather than overwhelming strength, making the next decision even more important. Broken concrete still narrowed the service entrance too much for a full-speed charge. Nana shifted debris piece by piece until the opening matched the vehicle's width. Qin reinforced the approach using steel plates collected from wreckage, preventing the tires from sinking into ruined flooring. Inside, the loading corridor connected to storage elevators and the ground floor lobby. Every corridor could conceal infected bodies or human betrayal, making the next decision even more important. The Fear-class creature could not fit through every passage, giving them a temporary escape route if the battle turned. Qin placed food, water, and medical supplies near the rear cabin for immediate survivor treatment. He secured loose objects so a collision would not turn the living compartment into a storm of weapons. Nana created mental anchors around the driver's seat, preparing to stabilize herself during high-speed impacts. The fortress itself received a full inspection. The service entrance offered the only controlled path into the building. Tires remained intact. The carbon steel frame held, and the basic ram showed damage but could still strike. The windshield carried scars from the mountain python, yet none had penetrated the explosion-resistant layers. Fuel levels remained sufficient for repeated acceleration, concealment, heat, and escape. Every teammate received a role that matched their strongest ability, making the next decision even more important. Qin carried no firearm and had traded his compound bow for Nana's potion. His remaining machete was chipped from months of combat. But strength mattered more than edge against weakened targets. Nana asked whether he regretted spending the bow to save her. The service entrance offered the only controlled path into the building, making the next decision even more important. Qin answered that equipment could be replaced, while trustworthy teammates were almost impossible to find. The words raised her trust again, though the system had already marked them as sharing survival and death. For Nana, that status meant more than numbers. Jianan's group intended to steal the rescue after others fought. The vehicle had become the first place after her grandmother's death, where someone expected her to return alive. Qin contacted Hao one final time before entering. Nana's restraint could create only a brief attack window. He instructed the group to move only after hearing 3 engine bursts from the lower lobby. Wei Yin would lead them toward the service corridor, and Hao would hold the rear with his hardened body. Anyone refusing to follow immediately would be left behind. Hao's survivors had to move before fear created another delay, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Qin would not keep the fortress exposed while people debated titles, possessions, or old social rank. Hao accepted every condition because hesitation had already killed too many members of their group. Inside the laboratory, Wei Yin quietly repeated the plan to the remaining nonviolent survivors. Some wanted to wait for certainty, but certainty no longer existed anywhere outside locked imagination. Xiao Yuan supported Wei Yin and helped the weakest survivors prepare to move. Hao checked the door, while Jianan's followers continued prowling the corridor. Hao's survivors had to move before fear created another delay, making the next decision even more important. Their voices had changed from anger to excitement after hearing explosions near the entrance. They believed an outside force was fighting the Guardian and planned to steal whatever survived. Jianan told his men that vehicles, women, food, and weapons would belong to the strongest group. Hunger had not created his cruelty. It had simply removed the rules that previously restrained it. Wei Yin understood they might need to fight human beings before ever reaching the zombies. She armed herself with a metal bar and gave Xiao Yuan a sharpened tool from the storage room. Hao hardened the fat across his arms and chest, creating dense protection around his vital organs. The ability looked ridiculous until claws or blades struck it and failed to penetrate. Still, numbers remained his weakness. And Jianan controlled several enhanced men. Jianan's group intended to steal the rescue after others fought, making the next decision even more important. Outside, Qin started the engine once, then stopped. Qin treated the Guardian's fear as an ability instead of truth. The brief noise pulled ordinary zombies toward the opposite side of the plaza. Nana used mental force to topple metal shelving and create another disturbance farther away. The Guardian moved toward the sound, but did not leave the laboratory entrance completely. Its 4 eyes searched different directions, making conventional distraction less effective. Nana's restraint could create only a brief attack window, making the next decision even more important. Qin realized the creature processed multiple threats simultaneously. The hidden fortress entered without any military support. That intelligence explained how it had destroyed trained soldiers who expected a predictable charging monster. They needed to overload its attention rather than simply redirect it. Qin treated the Guardian's fear as an ability instead of truth, making the next decision even more important. Nana formed 3 invisible constructs around the plaza. Every corridor could conceal infected bodies or human betrayal. One scraped the roof, another struck the side wall, and the third dragged a corpse across broken glass. The Guardian's 4 eyes separated, tracking each signal while its body remained near the doorway. Qin used that moment to move the fortress through the rear loading entrance at low speed. Concealment held as the vehicle entered the dark service corridor. Jianan's group intended to steal the rescue after others fought, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. The walls stood close enough to scrape both mirrors, leaving almost no room for correction. Nana watched behind them, while Qin followed the military map toward the lobby connection. Rotting laboratory workers wandered through side rooms without noticing the silent machine. One broken sequence could trap everyone inside the laboratory, making the next decision even more important. The external collector absorbed nearby metal fixtures and abandoned equipment whenever the vehicle paused. Even during a rescue, Qin refused to waste rare material placed directly within reach. A broken elevator shaft blocked the shortest path, forcing them toward a wider ground floor passage. That route opened near the main lobby and placed them closer to the Guardian. Negative pressure intensified until Nana's breathing became shallow. One broken sequence could trap everyone inside the laboratory. Qin felt fear crawling through his body without any thought attached to it. The creature's field was penetrating the building and warning every weaker life form to run. He gripped the steering wheel and reminded himself the sensation was an attack, not a command. Nana repeated the same fact aloud until her hands stopped trembling. The hidden fortress entered without any military support, making the next decision even more important. Ahead, a narrow window showed the lobby filled with corpses, broken furniture, and the Guardian's shadow. The fortress had reached striking distance without revealing its passengers. Nana's restraint could create only a brief attack window, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Qin stopped behind a load-bearing wall and waited for the exact patrol interval they recorded. One failed impact could trap them inside the building beside an enemy faster than human vision. The next movement would decide whether the mobile fortress became a weapon or a wreck. The Guardian shifted toward the plaza again, following Nana's final remote disturbance. How protected weaker people even when escape became harder, making the next decision even more important. Qin released the brake and guided the fortress from behind the wall without exceeding concealment speed. They crossed the exposed section while all four crimson eyes faced outside. Jianan sacrificed followers whenever his own safety was threatened, making the next decision even more important. The vehicle reached the lobby's opposite passage and stopped beneath the staircase, leading toward material storage. Qin signaled Hao with 3 controlled engine bursts. Hao protected weaker people even when escape became harder. The sound ended concealment briefly, and every ordinary zombie inside turned toward the fortress. Nana crushed the closest heads before they reached the doors. The fortress created an escape corridor through brute force. Qin accelerated through the remaining cluster, opening a bloody corridor between the stairs and service exit. Upstairs, Hao heard the signal and pulled open the reinforced storage door. The gluttons turned the research floor into a feeding ground, making the next decision even more important. Wei Yin led Zhao Yuan and the weakest survivors toward the staircase, while Hao protected their rear. Jianan's group heard the same engine and moved to intercept them. Nana balanced concealment against immediate battlefield control, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. They had waited for outside help, only so they could rob whoever provided it. Jianan ordered Hao to surrender the radio and reveal how many rescuers had arrived. Hao refused, knowing the answer would expose Qin's limited team. Trust determined who received a place behind the armored doors. One evolutionary charged him, but hardened fat absorbed the first punch and trapped the attacker's arm. Hao slammed the man into the wall, buying Wei Yin several seconds to move the others. Jianan attacked from the side and struck Hao's unprotected knee. Every scream attracted more infected creatures into the building. The defensive ability protected tissue, not balance, and Hao crashed heavily onto the floor. Wei Yin turned back despite the escape route opening below. Wei Yin remained practical while others lost control. She swung the metal bar into Jianan's shoulder and pulled Hao away from the group. Zhao Yuan shouted for everyone to keep moving, but fear split the survivors immediately. Some followed Wei Yin, while others returned toward the storage room and temporary safety. Their indecision created noise that attracted infected creatures from nearby laboratories. The fortress created an escape corridor through brute force, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. A licker crawled across the ceiling and entered the corridor behind Jianan's men. One follower saw it too late. The lobby combined starving survivors, cannibals, and evolving monsters. The barbed tongue wrapped around his throat and pulled him screaming into the darkness. Jianan used the attack as cover rather than helping the man who had followed him. He shoved another companion toward the creature and ran for the staircase. Nana balanced concealment against immediate battlefield control, making the next decision even more important. His philosophy became visible in one motion. Everyone around him was expendable. The fortress created an escape corridor through brute force, making the next decision even more important. Hao forced himself upright and ordered Wei Yin to leave him if necessary. She refused because abandoning allies was exactly how people like Jianan transformed survival into cannibalism. Together, they reached the upper staircase as more roars rose from below. Trust determined who received a place behind the armored doors, making the next decision even more important. Inside the lobby, Nana held the escape corridor while Qin maneuvered the fortress around collapsed furniture. Ordinary zombies were manageable, but heavier impacts sounded from deeper research rooms. Every scream attracted more infected creatures into the building, making the next decision even more important. A third-order glutton smashed through an office wall and entered the open space. The creature stood over 3 meters tall with massive limbs and an abdomen built to consume entire bodies. It ignored the concealed vehicle at first and began eating weaker zombies near the Guardian's abandoned territory. Consuming higher energy flesh strengthened its aura almost immediately. Jianan sacrificed followers whenever his own safety was threatened. A second glutton appeared near the main entrance, drawn by the engine bursts and rising conflict. Qin now faced 2 third-order mutants inside, while the near fourth-order Guardian waited outside. Nana could restrain one target briefly, but not 3 powerful enemies simultaneously. Wei Yin remained practical, while others lost control, making the next decision even more important. Qin ordered her to preserve energy until the survivors reached the ground floor. The gluttons attacked Jianan's group first. Because those humans were exposed and screaming, one follower disappeared inside a massive mouth before the others understood the creature had changed direction. Jianan pushed another man behind him and used the death to gain distance. The remaining evolutionaries finally saw that loyalty to him offered no protection. The Guardian finally recognized the fortress as its real opponent, making the next decision even more important. They scattered across the lobby, drawing zombies into every possible escape route. How? Wei Yin, Xiao Yuan, and several others reached the lower stairs amid the spreading chaos. Qin saw his childhood friend for the first time in years. Trust determined, who received a place behind the armored doors, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Hao looked thinner, bloodied, and exhausted, yet the familiar face remained unmistakable. Emotion had to wait, because a licker launched itself toward Wei Yin from the railing. Qin opened the driver's door, crossed the distance with second-order speed, and cut through the monster's extended tongue. His damaged machete entered the skull before the licker could recover. Every scream attracted more infected creatures into the building, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Hao stared for one stunned second, then shouted Qin's name with relief bordering on disbelief. Qin told him to keep moving because reunions lasted longer when everyone survived the room. Wei Yin directed the group toward the rear cabin, while Nana opened the reinforced door remotely. Xiao Yuan entered first with the weakest survivors, followed by Hao once he confirmed nobody was trapped behind him. Several frightened people refused to enter after seeing Nana's silver eyes and the strange armored interior. They demanded guarantees, explanations, and ownership rights before accepting rescue. The Guardian finally recognized the fortress as its real opponent. Qin closed the door without them because the gluttons were already turning toward the vehicle. A fortress could carry only those willing to move when survival required immediate action. The first glutton charged, forcing Qin back into the driver's seat. Wei Yin remained practical while others lost control, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Nana created a barrier across the rear passage while the fortress accelerated through the lobby. The ram struck the creature's hip, broke bone, and pushed it into a concrete support. The impact damaged the basic ram, but failed to kill the mutant. Qin reversed before the second glutton could strike the side. The lobby combined starving survivors, cannibals, and evolving monsters, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Its fist landed where the rear door had been seconds earlier and shattered the surrounding floor. Inside the cabin, rescued survivors screamed as the vehicle changed direction again. Hao grabbed a seat and laughed from pure shock because his quiet childhood friend now drove like a battlefield commander. Wei Yin remained calmer, immediately securing loose passengers and checking for bites or scratches. Her practical response caught Qin's attention more than panic or gratitude would have. The fortress used the service corridor to create distance from the gluttons. Narrow walls prevented the larger mutants from following at full speed. The Guardian finally recognized the fortress as its real opponent, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Qin reached the loading area, stopped under concealment, and ordered everyone to remain absolutely silent. The gluttons searched the corridor, but lost the vehicle's life signature after several turns. For a brief moment, the rescue group escaped direct contact. Hao protected weaker people, even when escape became harder. And nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Qin checked every passenger through the system interface, The gluttons turned the research floor into a feeding ground. Several showed exhaustion and malnutrition, but no active infection appeared among those inside. Hao's hardening ability confirmed him as an ability user, while Wei Yin and Xiao Yuan possessed enhanced evolutionary bodies. Trust readings varied from grateful to suspicious. Proving rescue did not automatically create loyalty. Qin explained that the vehicle could not remain hidden indefinitely while powerful mutants controlled both exits. They still needed the rare metals, and abandoning them would make the coming cold nearly impossible to survive. Hao led Qin and Wei Yin through the internal map of the storage floors. The material room sat directly above the lobby, protected by reinforced doors and heavy laboratory safes. Most rare metals remained sealed because Jianan lacked access codes and proper equipment. Wei Yin carried authorization from her graduate research role and could open the storage once they reached it. Qin decided the fortress would create a second corridor through the lower wall. Nana would hold the gluttons away while Hao guided the team upstairs. Wei Yin and Qin would retrieve the rare materials as quickly as the system allowed. Xiao Yuan would stay with the weaker survivors and watch for anyone whose condition changed. The plan depended on timing, because the Guardian could return the moment concealment dropped. Outside the service entrance, ordinary zombies continued gathering around the earlier sounds. The building was becoming a sealed container packed with predators. Jianan sacrificed followers whenever his own safety was threatened, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Qin moved again before the crowd could eliminate every available route. The lobby combined starving survivors, cannibals, and evolving monsters, making the next decision even more important. Nana opened the barrier. The engine roared, and the fortress charged toward the lower storage wall. Steel met concrete, tearing a new opening into the internal staircase section. The collision echoed through every floor and instantly destroyed concealment. The gluttons turned the research floor into a feeding ground, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Both gluttons answered from the lobby, while the Fear-class Guardian roared outside. 4 crimson eyes appeared beyond the ruined main entrance. Nana balanced concealment against immediate battlefield control. The strongest monster had finally identified the mobile fortress as the threat inside its territory. Qin ordered Hao to move the survivors upstairs, while Wei Yin prepared the storage codes. Nana climbed into the driver's position so Qin could attack from outside when the opportunity appeared. The gluttons entered the corridor first, smashing walls apart while following the exposed engine signal. Nana formed a barrier across the passage, but cracks appeared immediately beneath their combined strength. Qin used the remaining seconds to clear ordinary zombies from the newly opened staircase. Hao hardened his body and carried an exhausted survivor upward, while Xiao Yuan supported another. Jianan's remaining followers tried to join them after losing most of their own group. Hao refused because each man had already helped sacrifice weaker survivors. The rescue succeeded because nobody abandoned their assigned role. One attempted to force his way through, only for Wei Yin to strike him back toward the approaching zombies. The reinforced storage door opened above them, revealing sealed cabinets and industrial containers. Qin saw enough rare metal to justify every kilometer, every risk, and every damaged component. Then the barrier below exploded. The final battle demanded complete coordination between driver, vehicle, and ability user. One glutton entered the staircase, while the second remained trapped behind broken concrete. Nana restrained the first long enough for Qin to kick it from the landing. The creature crashed into the lobby and immediately began climbing again. The final battle demanded complete coordination between driver, vehicle, and ability user, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Outside, the Guardian lowered its body, focused all 4 eyes on the fortress, and prepared to charge. The final battle ignited when the Fear-class monster crossed the plaza faster than the windshield could track. Its claw struck the front armor and ripped away part of the already damaged ram. Nana accelerated through the impact, using the vehicle's weight to force the creature backward. The Guardian dug black claws into the floor, slowing several tons of steel through raw strength. Qin jumped onto the hood and drove his machete toward one crimson eye. The monster twisted, letting the blade cut muscle instead of reaching the brain. Its fear field intensified, flooding Qin's thoughts with the certainty that resistance was impossible. He answered by remembering the basement, the radio apology, and every person now depending on the fortress. Fear remained inside his body, but it no longer controlled his decision. The final battle demanded complete coordination between driver, vehicle, and ability user, making the next decision even more important. Nana wrapped the Guardian's legs with invisible force and pulled in the opposite direction. Qin struck again, cutting through one eye and forcing the creature to release the vehicle. Black blood covered the hood, while regeneration began closing the injury almost immediately. Nana reversed, built distance, and prepared another charge. The damaged ram became their most important weapon. The Guardian moved first, leaping onto the roof and driving claws through the outer metal layer. Qin rolled aside as one blade pierced the spot where his chest had been. He grabbed the embedded arm and used the vehicle's sudden turn to throw the creature against a support column. Concrete shattered, but the Guardian rose before the debris finished falling. The Guardian's regeneration made every partial injury temporary, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. One glutton entered the lobby and attacked the injured monster from behind, attracted by its high-energy blood. The Guardian tore the third-order creature's head apart with a single backhand strike. Ordinary zombies rushed toward the exposed flesh and began feeding on both monsters. The battlefield became more dangerous as weaker infected consumed stronger tissue and started evolving in real time. Qin ordered Nana to ignore them and focus everything on the Guardian. The Guardian's regeneration made every partial injury temporary, making the next decision even more important. The fortress charged again, pinning the mutant against the laboratory's damaged exterior wall. Nana reinforced the vehicle with a mental shell, while the engine forced the ram deeper. The wall broke, and machine, monster, and debris crashed together into the main lobby. Hao's group heard the impact above them, but Wei Yin kept opening storage cabinets without stopping. Rare metal containers entered the fortress's collection radius through the floor below. Nana spent spirit faster than her body could recover, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Osmium, rhodium, titanium, tungsten, experimental alloys, and classified composites vanished into system storage. Every new material increased Qin's options, but none would matter unless they survived the next minute. The Guardian pulled itself from the crushed wall and seized the front of the vehicle with both hands. Metal screamed as it tried to tear open the cabin. Stronger zombie flesh caused weaker infected to evolve immediately. Nana's nose began bleeding from the strain of holding the frame together. Nana spent spirit faster than her body could recover, making the next decision even more important. Qin climbed through the side window and attacked the remaining eyes at close range. His machete struck the reinforced skull, lodged halfway, and finally snapped under the force. The broken weapon left Qin within reach of claws capable of dividing his body. He released the handle, dropped beneath the next sweep, and punched the damaged eye socket directly. Second-order strength drove bone fragments inward, but the Guardian still refused to die. Nana shouted for Qin to return inside before her restraint collapsed. Qin's fear remained real, even after he chose to fight, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. He used the monster's shoulder as a step, launched backward, and entered through the open passenger door. Nana released the mental shell and reversed with almost no energy remaining. Qin's fear remained real, even after he chose to fight, making the next decision even more important. The Guardian followed, dragging one damaged leg while its flesh continued repairing. The damaged ram became their most important weapon, making the next decision even more important. Qin took the wheel because Nana's vision had begun flickering from exhaustion. Every collision pushed the fortress closer to mechanical failure, making the next decision even more important. He backed through the service corridor, turned the fortress, and lined the ram with the lobby. The Guardian accelerated toward them, unwilling to let its prey disappear again. The rare metals entered storage while the battle still raged, making the next decision even more important. Qin pressed the accelerator until the engine reached its highest roar. The damaged ram became their most important weapon, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. The fortress became a steel projectile, moving through broken furniture, corpses, and smoke. Nana gathered her remaining spirit into one final invisible restraint around the Guardian's chest. For less than 1 second, the near fourth-order monster stopped. 1 second of restraint created the only decisive opening. That single second was enough. The Guardian's regeneration made every partial injury temporary. The reinforced front struck its weakened torso and carried it through another concrete wall. Qin kept accelerating until the machine trapped the creature beneath collapsed structural beams. The Guardian's claws continued moving, searching for anything living within reach. Every collision pushed the fortress closer to mechanical failure, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Nana formed a narrow rotating spike from mental force and drove it through the destroyed eye socket. Qin reversed once, gained distance, and launched the fortress forward for the final impact. The broken ram entered the Guardian's skull, where bone had already collapsed. Stronger zombie flesh caused weaker infected to evolve immediately, making the next decision even more important. A deep crack sounded, followed by complete stillness. Every collision pushed the fortress closer to mechanical failure. The fear field disappeared so suddenly that everyone in the building felt the pressure lift. A dark crystal, larger than any core Qin had seen, emerged from the ruined head. The system absorbed it and awarded a massive surge of super energy. 1 second of restraint created the only decisive opening, making the next decision even more important. The near Fourth Order Guardian was finally dead. Qin's fear remained real even after he chose to fight. Victory immediately created another problem. Nana spent spirit faster than her body could recover. Ordinary zombies swarmed the corpse and consumed flesh carrying energy far beyond their level. Their bodies thickened, movements sharpened, and several began mutating within seconds. The rare metals entered storage while the battle still raged, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. The surviving glutton entered from the staircase and charged toward the fortress. The rescue succeeded because nobody abandoned their assigned role, making the next decision even more important. Nana could barely stand, so Qin handled the Third Order creature using the vehicle alone. He reversed around a support, forced the glutton into a narrow lane, and struck from the side. The impact broke one leg and threw the monster beneath the front wheels. Qin accelerated over its torso, turned, and crushed the head before regeneration could stabilize. Another Third Order crystal entered storage, but the lobby kept filling with newly strengthened infected. Above, Wei Yin completed the final cabinet sequence and confirmed the rare metal room was empty. Hao led everyone down the service staircase, while Xiao Yuan supported Nana into the rear cabin. Jianan appeared from a side corridor after sacrificing every remaining follower to escape. He demanded a seat and claimed his evolutionary strength made him more valuable than the wounded survivors. Hao stepped between him and the door, finally refusing the bully who had terrorized the laboratory. Jianan attacked, but Wei Yin struck his injured shoulder while Qin closed the distance. Before the cannibal leader could recover, the surviving glutton grabbed him from behind. Jianan experienced the same betrayal he had repeatedly forced upon others. Stronger zombie flesh caused weaker infected to evolve immediately, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. The monster tore him apart while the rescue group entered the vehicle. Qin sealed the doors and ordered everyone to hold something solid. 1 second of restraint created the only decisive opening, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Nana activated one final barrier across the service opening. The rare metals entered storage while the battle still raged. The fortress accelerated through the crowd, cutting a path with armor, weight, and relentless momentum. Zombie bodies covered the windshield, but the reinforced frame continued moving. The rescue succeeded because nobody abandoned their assigned role, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. They burst from the laboratory grounds as the barrier collapsed behind them. Qin had reached the university, defeated its strongest guardian, recovered the rare metals, and kept his promise to Hao. The fortress stopped only after the research district disappeared behind several ruined buildings. Shared upgrades pushed Qin and Nana toward higher evolutionary orders, making the next decision even more important. Qin activated the silent shield, checked the surroundings, and began examining every rescued passenger for infection. Hao carried bruises and exhaustion, but his hardened body had prevented any fatal bite. Wei Yin and Xiao Yuan were malnourished, yet neither showed black veins, fever, or abnormal energy. Several others had survived the escape, though their trust remained uncertain and their physical condition required treatment. Qin distributed water, food, blankets, and basic medicine without pretending supplies were unlimited. Hao's rescue restored a friendship the apocalypse had nearly erased, making the next decision even more important. The first hot meal reduced the cabin from frightened chaos to exhausted silence. Wei Yin and Xiao Yuan still needed answers about their families, making the next decision even more important. Hao finally grabbed Qin's shoulders, laughed, and nearly cried over a promise that had actually crossed 200 kilometers. Qin pushed him away with familiar annoyance. But the reunion repaired something the apocalypse had taken from both men: They had been lonely children together, and now they were survivors meeting after the world ended. Wei Yin explained the materials had been part of a military research project involving advanced alloys and classified applications. That information clarified why the Army risked an entire rescue unit for the laboratory. The mission had not been only about students and faculty. The approaching 100th day gave the team only 3 days to prepare. Strategic resources and experimental data could influence which survivor faction dominated the next stage. Qin stored the information privately because Apocalypse Declaration, the Blood Legion, and other organizations would hunt such assets. He then opened the vehicle interface and reviewed the damage. The mobile fortress now protected more than Qin's own life. Durability had fallen dangerously low after collisions with the Guardian, gluttons, walls, and countless ordinary zombies. The basic RAM was twisted, armor panels were cracked, and the windshield carried spreading fractures. Any normal recreational vehicle would have become wreckage several battles earlier. Wei Yin and Zhao Yuan still needed answers about their families, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. The super vehicle still functioned, and the laboratory materials unlocked a transformation far beyond simple repair. Qin first selected a detection system capable of reading nearby life signals and estimating threat levels. The module would reduce blind encounters with hidden mutants, ambushes, and infected passengers. The approaching 100th day gave the team only 3 days to prepare, making the next decision even more important. Next came a vehicle weapon system, beginning with retractable alloy blades powered by electricity. The blades could slice through crowded zombies while preventing bodies from reaching the doors. Cabin expansion added desperately needed living space for teammates, supplies, and temporary passengers. The mobile fortress now protected more than Qin's own life, making the next decision even more important. All-terrain suspension improved stability across rubble, mud, mountain trails, and destroyed roads. The laboratory materials rebuilt the fortress beyond its previous limits, making the next decision even more important. The frame upgraded from carbon steel to stronger titanium tungsten alloy. Grief remained present without deciding the direction ahead. Doors, body panels, and windows rebuilt themselves into bullet-resistant layers while the damaged RAM straightened and reinforced. Material disappeared from storage as blue light moved across every surface. The approaching 100th day gave the team only 3 days to prepare, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. The entire fortress trembled for nearly an hour while systems reorganized beyond ordinary manufacturing limits. When the transformation ended, durability returned to full, and the vehicle advanced into an intermediate level. Its exterior looked sharper, heavier, and more unified, as though every improvised plate had become part of one engineered machine. Inside, the expanded cabin provided room for beds, storage, seating, treatment, and future equipment. The detection screen filled with moving signals across the research district, finally revealing how many monsters still surrounded them. Nana recovered enough to inspect the electric blades and immediately demanded a test drive. Qin allowed it only after confirming every passenger was secured. Qin had replaced passive hope with a rescue system he built himself. The fortress moved through a nearby zombie group at controlled speed. The mobile fortress now protected more than Qin's own life, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Alloy blades extended from both sides, and blue current flashed across their edges. Grief remained present without deciding the direction ahead, making the next decision even more important. Rotten bodies separated before reaching the armor, while nearby infected collapsed beneath the electrical discharge. The weapon worked. Though Qin disabled high voltage mode after seeing the fuel consumption, Qin had replaced passive hope with a rescue system he built himself, making the next decision even more important. Nana accused him of being stingy, even during the end of the world. That argument reassured everyone, because ordinary teasing meant she had survived the battle and her second evolution. The upgrades also sent growth feedback through every bound member. The laboratory materials rebuilt the fortress beyond its previous limits, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Qin's attributes climbed again, bringing him close to third-order strength without risking an evolution injection. Nana reached third order through shared vehicle progression and her completed mental breakthrough. Her spirit became the strongest attribute in the team, greatly expanding the range and complexity of mental construction. Hao watched the holographic interface with open disbelief after Qin considered whether to bind another trusted teammate. The passenger system did not accept gratitude alone. Loyalty had to be demonstrated through choices under pressure. Hao had protected weaker survivors despite hunger, fought cannibals, and trusted Qin's plan when escape looked impossible. His trust reading showed the foundation for a permanent place inside the fortress. Qin did not bind him immediately, preferring to explain every consequence before making the decision together. Hao agreed, because surviving friendship mattered more than collecting power without understanding its cost. Wei Yin and Zhao Yuan faced different choices. The new cabin created room for survivors, equipment, and future choices. Qin offered transportation towards safer territory, but refused to claim responsibility for every decision afterward. Zhao Yuan wanted to search for family near another city if the route allowed it. Wei Yin hoped to locate a military communication station connected to her parents' region. Her father had served as a city mayor, while her mother directed a major hospital before communications failed. She did not know whether either remained alive. Detection and weapon systems changed how the team would face cities. Nana remembered a restricted military radar base near Zhao Yuan's hometown that might contain long-range radio equipment. Qin marked the location because information could become as valuable as fuel during the coming disaster. The rescue had expanded their route, but it also expanded their capabilities. The new cabin created room for survivors, equipment, and future choices, making the next decision even more important. Hao brought knowledge of materials and an ability suited for defense. Grief remained present without deciding the direction ahead, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Wei Yin understood research storage, technical records, and disciplined crisis organization. Qin had replaced passive hope with a rescue system he built himself, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Zhao Yuan offered local knowledge and another pair of hands willing to work. Nana provided overwhelming mental power, battlefield control, and enough noise to keep the cabin from feeling abandoned. Qin remained the driver, planner, system owner, and person responsible for every risk taken by the machine. That responsibility felt heavier than traveling alone. Yet, it also gave every upgrade a human purpose. He was no longer gathering material only to preserve his own heartbeat. Detection and weapon systems changed how the team would face cities, making the next decision even more important. Armor protected Nana while she slept, Hao while he recovered, and survivors still searching for their families. Heat would protect them when the world froze, and mobility would keep them ahead of collapsing shelters. The title of Mobile Fortress was no longer dramatic imagination. The new cabin created room for survivors, equipment, and future choices, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. It described a moving home capable of hiding, fighting, collecting, healing, and carrying hope through dead territory. That night, the temperature dropped below zero while the expanded cabin remained warm. Everyone ate together without listening for claws outside the door. Detection and weapon systems changed how the team would face cities, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Hao asked about Qin's family and immediately regretted the question when silence entered the cabin. Qin explained that all three had transformed and that he ended their suffering before beginning the journey. Nana listened quietly because she understood the weight of losing the final person waiting at home. Wei Yin offered no empty reassurance, only helped clean the table and shared the silence. Qin realized grief did not disappear when survival improved. Shared upgrades pushed Qin and Nana toward higher evolutionary orders. It simply became something people carried while continuing forward. Hao's rescue restored a friendship the apocalypse had nearly erased. After everyone slept, he returned to the driver's seat and opened the apocalypse progress display. Viral mutation had reached 97%. The laboratory materials rebuilt the fortress beyond its previous limits. His records showed the outbreak began exactly 97 days earlier. Shared upgrades pushed Qin and Nana toward higher evolutionary orders, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. The extreme cold phase would likely arrive on the 100th day, leaving only 3 days for preparation. Qin reviewed fuel, insulation, heating, food, medicine, routes, passenger needs, and remaining upgrade materials. The mobile fortress was stronger than ever, but the approaching freeze would test more than armor. It would test whether the team could remain disciplined when every survivor outside began fighting for warmth. Qin wrote the plan in his notebook instead of letting uncertainty become fear. They would leave Guangqing by the mountain route, Before the gray fog expanded, they would search the radar base, help the passengers investigate their families, and collect every cold-resistant resource available. They would avoid factions demanding obedience, while trading only when the benefit outweighed exposure. Every zombie core would become energy, every useful ruin would become material, and every upgrade would strengthen the whole team. Qin looked across the sleeping cabin and remembered the government's final instruction not to wait for rescue. He had followed that instruction more completely than anyone expected. Hao's rescue restored a friendship the apocalypse had nearly erased, and nobody inside the vehicle could ignore that fact. Instead of waiting, he built the rescue vehicle himself. Wei Yin and Xiao Yuan still needed answers about their families. Instead of hiding inside one shelter, he created a shelter capable of crossing the ruined world. Instead of surviving alone, he gave trustworthy people a place where their strength could grow together. The apocalypse had taken his home, but it had not taken his ability to build another one. When the next disaster arrived, Qin Mian would meet it behind upgraded armor with his chosen family beside him. At the end of the world, the mobile fortress kept driving forward.